Hi guys, and welcome to this week's weekly EO Byte. This week, one of our sassy engineers, Jack, is going to go over Cloud Sandbox with you guys. We hope you enjoy the video, and we will see you guys next week.
Thanks, Michelle. My name is Jack Finkline, and on this week's weekly EO Byte, I wanted to cover Zscaler's Sandbox capabilities and review several key configuration items that relate to Sandbox. Zscaler's Cloud Sandbox provides a powerful way to protect your organization from unknown files that users download. If a user downloads a file that meets Sandbox policy criteria and Zscaler has no record of the MD5 hash, the file will be sent to the Cloud Sandbox for analysis and execution. Zscaler then records the verdict of the Sandbox analysis to the Zscaler threat database. And Sandbox policy allows you to take full advantage of Zscaler's massive database of scanned, known files and provide many users with an instant malicious or benign decision. By utilizing Sandbox policy, not only are you contributing to the threat database if your users encounter an unknown file, but you get to leverage the analysis that has already been done on millions upon millions of files. And with that introduction, let's get into creating a Sandbox policy. So within the ZIA Administrator portal, you're going to want to navigate to Policy and then Sandbox. And then before we actually add a Sandbox rule, it's important to note that you will only be able to customize or add Sandbox policies to your ZIA tenant if you have the Advanced Cloud Sandbox SKU. Otherwise, you will still have Zscaler Sandbox capabilities, but only through the default rule. Now we'll go ahead and click Add Sandbox Rule, and we'll cover some of the criteria and action options available. Starting with file types, you can be granular with which file types you want the Sandbox policy to apply to. This includes zip files, executable files, Microsoft Office files, and more. And by default, no file types are selected. So you either want to go in here and select the specific file types you want the policy to apply to, or just select all of the file types. You can also specify which destinations you want the rule to be applied to via URL categories. And then if required, you can scope the rule to users, user groups, departments, locations, location groups, and by default, all of these will be any. Sandbox categories allows you to customize which type of malicious file this rule should apply to. Protocols allows you to select the specific supported Sandbox protocol. And finally, you can specify which ZPA application segment the Sandbox policy is enforced on. Only ZPA application segments configured for source IP anchoring or applications configured for ZIA inspection will show up here. And moving on to action, first we'll cover the first time action options available. Starting with allow and do not scan, this option can be used for rules where you do not want the files being sent to Zscaler for Sandbox analysis. You can think of this action as a Zscaler Sandbox bypass, and if used, it should be ranked above your other Sandbox policies. The allow and scan option allows users to immediately download unknown files that meet the rule criteria, but the file is still sent to Zscaler's Sandbox environment for analysis and execution. If the file is deemed malicious after analysis, a patient zero alert is created and future downloads of the file are blocked. This action preserves user experience by allowing users to have immediate access to the unknown file, but still sends the file to be analyzed. And then the quarantine option prevents users from downloading a file if it meets the above criteria, and displays a notification informing the end user that the file has been sent for analysis. Once the analysis is complete, the file will automatically begin downloading to the user's device if the outcome is benign. If the Sandbox analysis deems the file malicious, the user will receive a block notification and all future downloads for other users will be blocked as well. You can customize both the quarantine notification as well as the block notification within ZIA's end user notification configuration. The AI instant verdict option allows you to give users an immediate result to an unknown file and still send that file to Zscaler Sandbox environment for full analysis. This option is recommended for rules that have broader scope criteria in order to preserve user experience and reduce patient zero alerts. Action for subsequent downloads configuration allows you to customize the action for subsequent downloads of an analyzed file. If you select allow, the Sandbox policy will allow the download of a file if it meets the rule criteria, even if the file is deemed malicious. Zscaler does not recommend setting it to allow unless the policy is being used for testing. And And then finally, minimum threat score can be customized between 40 and 70 to allow the downloading of files if they are below the minimum threat score. If a minimum threat score is not set, the file will be blocked if it receives the categorization Sandbox suspicious. I think that covers all the options here. As I mentioned earlier, there is a Zscaler default Sandbox policy. This has the first time action of allow and scan and applies to Windows executables, Windows library files, and zip files, and is scoped to several URL categories. And speaking of the allow and scan action, how do we actually configure alerts if a malicious file was downloaded to a user's device? So to configure a patient zero alert, you can navigate to administration and then alerts. And under the define alerts tab, make sure you have a patient zero alert already defined. If you don't, you can click add alert definition and then under alert name, search for patient zero. Select patient zero and then click save. I already have a patient zero alert, so I'm not going to configure one here. And then to customize who actually receives the alert notification, you can click on the Publish Alerts tab and then click an alert subscription. And this will allow you to enter an email address that you want any of your ZIA alerts to be sent to. So you'll enter an email address here, and then you want to make sure that patient zero alerts under critical is toggled. I have this enabled, so I'm just going to click cancel. And I wanted to review a couple of other configurations within malware protection as they can impact how Sandbox policy is enforced. So under policy and then malware protection, we'll want to make sure that both inspect inbound traffic and inspect outbound traffic is enabled, as that will be required for Sandbox policy enforcement. And then under security exceptions, any URLs added to do not scan content from these URLs will bypass Sandbox policy. And then one final note about Zscaler's Cloud Sandbox is it also supports out-of-band inspection of files via the Zscaler API. This is where you can send supported file types via post request to be scanned by Zscaler's Cloud Sandbox. And then after about 10 minutes, you can use the API to send a GET request using the file's MD5 hash to get the full analysis and summary detail report. Once you have your desired Sandbox policies created, you can review a high-level report of your ZIA Sandbox activity by navigating to Analytics and then Sandbox Activity Report. Thanks so much for tuning in to this week's EO Byte, and I hope you learned something new about Zscaler's Cloud Sandbox.